This video is going to talk very briefly. I promise. After the last one, this one's going to be brief. I want to talk briefly about the important questions that we use when we study society. There are three broad questions that frame a kind of sociological inquiry. The first is, what kind of society is this? The second is, how does it really work, and why? And the third is a question about the ways in which society might need to be changed and how that change might be accomplished. So, as I mentioned in the last video, studying social problems requires that we understand the context in which they occur, the social order, the social organization of a society. So if we're going to do that, we need to determine a society's perspectives, a society's values, its overall nature and composition. And so to answer these three questions, we need respectively three things. The first would be accurate descriptions of the society itself. The second would be clear explanations about how things operate. And the third would be honest evaluations about how change can be accomplished. So I'll take each of these just very briefly in turn. So descriptions are essentially accomplished through observation, a broad sort of descriptive profile. You can do that narratively. You could do that statistically, right? There are all kinds of different ways in which we can compile, in essence, an accurate description of the society. Again, the unit of analysis is the society, not the individuals in that society. So the data that we collect, the profile that we build, is going to be a picture of the society itself, and not so much a picture of the individual people who make up that society. This is almost a journalistic endeavor, right? So journalism is kind of a description of events in most cases, but in our context, the description or the narrative or the profile, if you will, of the society is really, really important in answering what kind of society this is. That's that first question. The question with regard to how it really works is where we find ourselves looking for and trying to build clear explanations, right? We want to explain and analyze and understand how society actually operates. And for sociology, that's going to look, as I mentioned in the previous video, most of the time at culture and at structure. So the structural arrangements, for example, of a society can dictate a number of things about how that society operates. And so we want to make sure that we have clear explanations of the various aspects of the society that we're scrutinizing. And then the honest evaluations lead us to see the ways in which we could take the society as it is and see how it could be reorganized or reordered in a way that makes it, that makes it consistent with, say, for example, shared social values, or more equitable, or more inclusive, or less problematic, right? Again, in a class about social problems, a lot of our evaluations with regard to change are going to be built around how we can bring particular social problems to an end, or at the very least ameliorate some of their effects. This last point, I want to make a little, almost an editorial comment about that last set of questions, the evaluative questions about how we change society. The underlying germ of that idea is the notion that sociology shouldn't remain detached, that sociology shouldn't, and in many ways can't, pursue a goal of objectivity, right? A kind of neutrality. The 20th century, so the previous century, was marked by a stance among scientists of kind of detached um, um, sort of detached objectivity toward whatever subject they were studying. In our case, it would be society. The problem is um, that there's a something of an ethical obligation. So if society, see if you follow the premise here, if society is a social construct, and I think there's a persuasive case that it is. So if the society around us is something that we collectively build, and we can see that the society that we are building is advantaging some people or some groups at the expense of other people or groups, it kind of becomes incumbent on us to recommend ways in which that could be changed, right? So that since we're not stuck with it, pretending like we're just sort of describing the world as it is and not trying to get involved in any way in how it operates is a little bit deceptive, right? That we're not separate from society. We're members of it. We have an understanding of how the society works. It's useful then for us to step in and um, um, not pretend as though we're objective and detached, and instead play a progressive role in trying to help society improve and be made better. So why are description, explanation, and evaluation so important? Well, again, as I mentioned in the previous video, there's an underlying assumption in science of philosophical naturalism, right? That there are rules that govern the way that the universe works, and that those rules and principles operate consistently. Well, that applies to society as well. So even though society is constantly changing, and even though it's a little kind of squishy relative to things like chemistry or physics or some other of the physical sciences, there are still rules. There are rules that govern and shape the patterns that we see when we look at society, when we examine social facts. And so there are some conditions that apply to understanding the cause and effect relations that sort of form the social world, just as there are that apply to the physical world. And these essential conditions are this, right? That the basic facts need to be gotten right, and that's a description thing, right? We talked about description as how we get an accurate picture of what kind of society we're in. So we have to get the basic facts right. We need to understand how things really work, and that requires sociological thinking. That requires a sociological imagination. That's the explanation part. So we need to generate theories that stand up to scrutiny, that stand up to testing, and that get at the core of how social processes actually operate, and the consequences of the operation of those processes. And then the third essential condition is that thinking about society and how it needs changing means that we have to we have to note the key social values that define a given society and work to see how structures, especially institutions, sort of operate or fail to deliver on those values. If America claims to be a democracy, right? If America advances as one of its core social values the idea that we're a democracy, then we need to make sure that collective decision making is reflected in the selection of our leadership and the operation of our other social institutions, because that would be what a democratic society looked like. So we use those core social values as kind of a measuring stick, as a kind of gauge to see if America is in fact, or any society, we're going to focus on the United States, but you can apply this to any society to see whether or not institutions are in fact actually delivered, delivering on the promises that are reflected in those core values. And if it doesn't, then we can evaluate the degree to which they're not, and talk about how we address that, how we sort of make it the case that America becomes, say, more democratic or freer, or whatever cultural value it is that we happen to be looking at. So that's why these things are important. That's why it's critical that we think about the questions that we're asking. We're making sure that we address all of those elements, right? The description, the explanation, and the evaluation. All three parts have to kind of be in place. One of the things that we're going to use in this class to accomplish that is we're going to use what we call critical theory. Now, critical theory originates in the critiques of the 1800s, especially the work of people like Marx and Weber and some of these early sociologists who looked at power relations and uncovering power relations, who wanted to understand the degree to which social order and social organization reflects conflict, right? That there's a strain of sociology that argues that social organizations and social institutions operate to create a kind of equilibrium or homeostasis, that structures exist because they're functional. That's kind of the Durkheimian tradition, which is why we call that particular theoretical paradigm structural functionalism. The argument is that social structures exist, and they take the form that they take because they're functional. They contribute to social stability. A competing strain or a competing perspective within sociology argues that in fact, society is comprised of competing interests, right? That everybody in society or groups within society have different and competing interests relative to other groups in society, and that groups will spend their resources and their energies preserving the advantages they have or the resources they control, while other groups will try to gain access to those things. So it's competition. You can kind of see it in a kind of microcosm in the nature of the relationship between, say, for example, an employer and an employee. What an employer wants from their worker is as much work as they can get. And in exchange for that, they're going to pay them, but they're going to pay them as little money as they can be sort of compelled to part with, right? Because that is rational. That is what they want. They want to get as much work out of the workers as they can in exchange for as little money as possible. Workers want exactly the opposite, right? They want to make as much money as they can, and in exchange for that, they want to deliver as little work as they have to. Again, that is a completely rational thing for them to want. But you can see the conflict, right? That these two parties, the employer and the employee, are in a relationship. They need each other, but the interests, the goals, the purpose for them being in that relationship is diametrically opposed to that of the other. And how that conflict plays out is going to shape, say, for example, what the workplace looks like. It doesn't mean open fighting, although sometimes it does come down to that. But employers might want to get you to show up to work 5 minutes early. They're not going to compensate you for that, but you're there and ready to clock in when your shift begins, as opposed to showing up right at that moment. They might want to ask you to work a little bit later, or to come in on your day off. Right? Little things like that reflect their effort to try to get more out of you than you might be wanting to give them as an employee. And employees will do the same sort of thing. When the boss isn't around, you work a little bit less vigorously intensely than when your boss is there, right? So you see that again, you can kind of see that relationship. So critical theory starts from that assumption that society is made up of these groups with competing interests, and competition over those interests is going to be the thing that drives how that society is organized, how that society is ordered. The focus of a critical analysis of how society operates is going to be consistent with a focus on that evaluation part, right? We're going to get the descriptions and evaluations correct, but it's more than that. We want to understand sort of where those points of tension, where those social problems exist, and the nature of those social problems, so that they can be addressed, so that they can be resolved. The focus is going to be the focus of a critical analysis is always going to be on material conditions, history, and ideology. So, sort of a geography and place-oriented set of questions, a consideration of previous conditions in the present moment. That's the history part, and then ideology, right? The social and cultural values that are shaping the actions and the understandings of the people inside that society. And as you can see, that's going to require a sort of interdisciplinary approach, an interdisciplinary understanding. So we will do a bit on history. We will do a bit on geography. We will do a bit on material analysis, because again, that's really, really important information to have, so that we're addressing all three of those important questions. All right, so I told you this one was going to be shorter, and I hope I haven't disappointed. So until next time, take care.